مثلا انا اول مره بشوف مايكروسوفت يتكلموا عن ميديا بهذا الشكل. هلا هم للاسف مايكروسوفت بطل يعني هذا الشيء هو كان عن امبارح احنا مشاركين 5 شيء اللابتوب عشان بي سي تعمل العمل هذا يعني يعني مش زي ابل بلاك اند بلاي تولز لا
في كستمايزيشن كتير
طبعا
بعدين دول بس كل واحد اكيد اللي هو الفلوس تبعه عنده مش مشلف
ابل
لازم فيها اكسبيرينس يعني
مش لما قال انا قاعد طبعا منظمه شوف على الاقوى كده معاك شو
كبير زي ما هي هاي المشكله ايه لك شغاله
روح طبعا كثير من الناس لا تفهموا أول نصح ما في شير صبغ نعمل البروجكت عندنا كذا مش شرط مع طلع على صفحة أنا جماعة والله
حاول شوية ستيج بعيد
لما نزلنا في موضوع انفصل الجزيرة احنا بدنا نشتغل بروجكت بعدين سلمنا التيم اللي احنا عيناه ضربنا له اشتغلنا بشعب محمد جسنا مع شعب مباشر وسهلا هذا by nature they are not good.
Then you have to get this body. Then you have to go to the other level. Then you have to
Very good morning to you, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the second day of the Al Jazeera Future Media Leader Summit. Today we will start our first speaker, Dr. Yasser Bashir, the Executive Director of Digital at Al Jazeera Media Network. He will be briefing you for the next half an hour. Please welcome Dr. Yasser Bashir.
Good morning. I hope you had your coffee today. Before I start, there is actually some anticipation in the audience here. It's an internal thing that happened in the network recently. We did some restructuring, so all the digital properties now are part of digital, a new group that we created. So everyone is anticipating what I'm going to talk about. So let me just start the slide here. Okay. So we're going to talk a little bit at a high level about the principles of the digital strategy for Jazeera in the age of LOLs, WTS, things like that. So let me just see a show of hands. How many of you use TV news as the primary source of news? No one watches TV as the primary source? One person. I'm not going to ask you how old you are. So the TV audience is aging. CBS viewers, the median age is 60. CNN is 61. BBC is 61. Fox News is 68. That's the median age of TV news viewers around the globe. I think we don't have numbers about the Middle East, but I think it is probably the low 50s. And that is because of the technology penetration at a regional scale. It's a little bit not on par with Europe and the United States and Asia. So I think it's in the low 50s, but still very high. So that created a gap, right? A lot of people don't know what CNN is. I mean, it's a little exaggeration, but there's a really big gap between the parents and the kids. So our target audience in Al Jazeera for digital is between 16 and 45. That's just our estimate. Who don't watch TV, always connected, and like television. That's our challenge. So to get there and reach that audience, we have 6 challenges. Let's walk through these challenges in the next few minutes. Challenge number 1, we live in really a storm or a flood of content. So let me prove it to you. So this was only 10 seconds. So what happened in these 10 seconds? There were 5,000 minutes of uploaded videos on YouTube, just in 10 seconds. We probably had Al Jazeera uploaded some videos during these 10 seconds. 75,000 tweets. 550,000 new posts. Probably Egypt Plus did a couple of posts in the last 10 seconds. This is really bad. And 12,500 hours of video views coming from the 1.9 billion users on Facebook. So how can we as a publisher stand out from the crowd and reach our audience? That's the challenge that publishers are facing. So that's challenge number 1. Challenge number 2, audience is attention pool. There was some research that's been done several years ago. I think Microsoft has done similar research, where in 2000, the average attention span of an adult is 12 seconds. 2014, it dropped 4 seconds and became 8 seconds. By the way, that is actually a second less than the goldfish. And don't ask me how they measure the attention span of a goldfish, but it is known to be 9 seconds. And that's a problem and a challenge for us. The third challenge is we have a fragmented audience, and this is really very challenging for publishers. You have so many social media platforms out there. The decision is which one we should be on. We can't be on all of them. And we face this problem in Asia Plus when we created Asia Plus. In fact, we still are trying to solve this challenge. So the Asia Plus, when we started, we were organized this way. So you have an editorial team, a creative team, a data team, an engagement team. That worked well for one platform. But when we want to go on 10, 15 different social media platforms, you can't really scale it. Because that becomes very expensive, especially when you produce videos at a scale every day. So the cost of production is very, very high. So that's another challenge. Challenge number 4 is the democratization of content. Really, with the advances in social media, there has been major change. This is a typical production value chain in a traditional ecosystem. So it starts by the creators. They work with production companies. When they produce the content, they give it to the channels. They use distribution, whether it's freeware or through cable, to reach through one device, a single device, to a household. This is really just a high level, the value chain. But when this became accessible to normal people, the creators have direct access to the distribution channels, and they bypass us as publishers. That works also for news, right? User-generated content, blogs, and videos that are made by people about news, about current events. So it's not only video production, it is content production for movies and documentaries and so forth, but also news. And that made it very challenging for us as publishers. How can we stand not only against the presence of social media, but also that creators and influencers have direct access to the audience, and they can engage with them directly. The fifth challenge that we're facing, that social media platforms are not our friends. And I know that there are a couple of people on social media here, Twitter, but they're not also our enemies. I don't think they're enemies. They are kind of in the middle. They're our friend. And here's why. Sorry, the clicker is kind of hard to work with. You remember a few months ago, this is a picture of a person, a firefighter from Sweden, who has been subjected to an incident, an accident that affected his face when Facebook saw it. He's actually a hero in Sweden. They saw the picture, they removed it. That's an editorial decision. When a newspaper put this picture up on the Facebook page, Facebook removed it. That's an editorial decision. So a news editor sitting in the newsroom thinks he's in control, is actually not in control. You know, also remember the fake news story. Here is the title of a newspaper a couple months ago. The search giant said that it would ban the publishers with articles intended to mislead or deceive readers. So let's take an example. You know, when President Trump said, we're going to build the wall and we're going to have Mexico pay for it. Is that deceiving? Would they not allow him to publish this on the web? So actually, Google is becoming the publisher and the decision maker in this. So they're not a technology company only. They're not a social media platform. They're actually news editor. So we have our audience, Asia Plus and Al Jazeera, and many of you as publishers have their content live on social media platforms, and we are subjected to their algorithms and their editorial decision making. Okay? So, not only that, their business model is not really matching with the business model of the publisher. So let's understand the business model of our friend. The revenue model is built just at a high level on two main elements. One is the impressions, per 1,000 impressions, the cost of impression. Basically, if you go to the web page or to the Facebook news feed, you get ad banners, some may roll in videos, that's impression. And there's a cost to that for advertisers. Facebook makes some money, and the content provider makes some, like a revenue share. The other one is cost per click. When you see an ad, you click on it, there's cost. So there are two main revenue streams for Facebook and other social media platforms. Okay. So what are the levers that Facebook works with to increase the revenue? They have four levers really to control the revenue. Active user, Twitter, Facebook, they are in a race to increase new users and active users who are subscribing and coming to their website every day. That's one level. The second is produce more content. That's why they come to us and they encourage users to create more content, because that generates more traffic and more content to publish on the newsfeed that appear to the audience. The third one is an ad load. Ad load is basically when you go on Facebook newsfeed or Twitter, what is the balance between enough ads and too much ads would be kind of spent. Right? So there is a limit to the number of ads that they can show us on the newsfeed. The other is the time spent. The time spent, they would like me to spend more. These are related to each other. If I am a publisher, like Asia Plus and Al Jazeera English and Arabic and other assets that other publishers have on Facebook, what kind of control do we have here? Not too much. I can't control the time spent because I don't have information about the users. I have about the general visitors, but I don't have detailed information about individuals like Facebook and Google and Twitter have. I can't control the ad load. All I can do is, I can't control the active users. All I can do is put more content. And that is very costly. And if I want my content to appear on the news feed, I have to pay for it. So we generate revenue from them from one end and take some of that money and put it back into the social media platform to boost our content and make people see it. And that's not a fair deal, actually. That is why The Guardian, a couple of weeks ago, removed their content from Insta article, right? Instant article, and I think from App News. So this is for us a major challenge. It works against our interests as publishers. We don't have control. We don't have actually information or any intelligence about the individual audience, so we can serve them the right information at the right time based on knowledge of their behavior. We only know general, demography, their age group, their affiliation, just high level. But I cannot provide personalized information. The last challenge is the social media platforms are beasts. And we should continue to feed the beast. This is a real data from Facebook. The yellow one here is the organic reach. The orange is the paid. What's wrong with this picture? The yellow is not really increasing. We would like to see, as publishers, that our audience that come to our Facebook page or our Twitter feed come and increase over time in terms of reach without paying for it. That actually, you could distill that into loyalty. Social media platforms are not designed to increase and up the loyalty of our audience so they can come back to us without pushing content and spending, boosting, and advertising to the social media platform to have them come to our platforms. Right? So this is the last actually challenge that we are facing. So the picture is not very dark, but these are the challenges and realities that we as publishers have to face in order to be able to develop our going forward strategy. So where do we go from here? I always like this picture because it says a very important message to the team who's working with digital and people who are also supporting the digital group in Al Jazeera. That is, when we want to make change and affect change, it has to start from inside first, from within. And then it spills over to the outside world. Some might mention this is what Apple did. I'll show you a quote from that. We have to make the change on the inside, and that's what we've been doing. We created a digital group, we put the teams together, we are creating collaboration between the digital group and other entities and the channels in the organization, and we're changing the culture internally, because if we don't change internally we'll not be able to affect change outside and capture wider audience that deserve to see our content. Our content is unique, it's award-winning, but we need to make it in a way and personalize it in a way to reach the right person in the right place at the right time. This is a quote from Steve Jobs, and this is what I mean by starting with why we're doing this. It's a long kind of paragraph, but the key one here is because the ones who are crazy enough to think that they can change the world are the ones who actually do. And it started inside Apple. It started inside Apple. Everyone believed in this, and it came to the outside world. That's why people who have Apple don't have an Apple iPhone. But if who have Apple devices, they feel they're part of a special group. A part of not elite, but a special group. So it is the user experience, and I'll come to that. So I put this, and I hope it's not shocking a lot of people that here. I don't think really in digital we are in the business of news. Because news is kind of a one direction. You like standing, sitting in the podium and talking to people. I think we are in the business of informing people. It's more about conversation. You know who the person who's sitting in front of you, how much he or she knows, and based on this, you tell them things they don't know. What, when, and where. And this is kind of the key that we would like to build in the digital group. We are in the business of informing people, which means I have to understand the people I'm talking to. So, and we have to focus our product on user experience. When you go to Apple, when you buy an Apple phone, the user experience doesn't start from like the user interface and things like that. It starts from the time you think of buying the Apple device and going to the Apple store. It's an entire experience. You go to the Apple store, it's a different experience. You take the box, go home, it's a different experience. So it's about user experience. Even though the iPhone is not so very much advanced from other phones in terms of technology, but it is the user experience. And take that and we map it to Al Jazeera. Our content is unique. We have to focus on taking this content and put it in a unique user experience. From the time they think about learning something. So I think that the user journey should start not from the time they come to our website or our apps. It's from the understanding the triggers that make them think about going where to get what information. That is very important for us in terms of our digital strategy. We have to understand the user behavior prior to coming to our content and looking at our content. This is where the user experience starts, not from the app. So, how are we going to do this? There are 4 pillars of investment I believe we are doing right now, and we're preparing, and we started, I'll share with you a couple of projects. First of all, invest in our people. And we have a plan, and we're working on that with Al Jazeera leadership. That's very key. So invest in our people is very important. Second, we have to invest in our content. We have to diversify the content. It's not only about hard use, but making the audience, our user, our visitors whole in terms of knowledge. They know about the world, different parts of the world, different genres, different content. Not only political news, but different parts of the important information, parts of information that we think are relevant for them. In addition to that, we have to invest in platforms, in the technology. Otherwise, we would not be able to build loyalty. We have to develop a strategy to nudge the audience from Facebook, from Twitter, into our own platform that would allow us to build more loyalty to our audience. That's why I'm saying social media platforms are not our enemy. They're actually also our friends. Right? We should use these platforms to build the audience, and if we want to increase loyalty, we should bring the audience to our platforms. The question is, how will this platform look like? That's what we're working on. And then we have to invest in understanding the audience so we know who we're talking to. And that is why in Al Jazeera, we are in the process of building diversification of content, as you will see also, making the platform smarter and know more, and analytics to understand the behavior of the audience. So we can build a package, product that understands and matches the user expectation, user experience. For this, we have a couple of projects. One is an audio project. So we're building studios to serve the digital assets of the web. I think our goal is to build a portfolio of brands and sub-brands of Al Jazeera, like the Asia Plus and others, here, that when the user goes and they want a piece of information, they take that different brand and they stay within the ecosystem of Al Jazeera. So this is an audio that has two components. One is technology. We built a bot that runs on Facebook Messenger, and so some AI component is built into it, and also content, original audio content that will be branded based on the Asia Plus brand, Al Jazeera English, Al Jazeera Arabic, and documentary and so forth. The second is called Sadim, and that is to answer the challenge that I mentioned before, which is about the production value chain. Right? We have to be plugged into the influencers, and we have to scale that. We have to enable them and make them part of our ecosystem. And this platform will be launched towards the end of this year. And then diversify the content formats. This is an AR, augmented reality, virtual reality strategy that we have. We soft launched as VR, and we are in the process of producing 2D and 3D content right now. So these are the three projects that we have. So at the end, I would like to say that we have a long and winding road. And it is challenging for us as Al Jazeera, and also challenging for other partners and colleagues that I talked to from other companies. But I trust actually that we have the best team out there. And I'm really kind of honored to be working with a very smart team on digital and my colleagues around me. This is where it will help us to become leaders in digital. And that is actually my last slide. So let's go and be different. Thank you very much.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Now we would like to welcome our next speaker, Mr. Mohammed Nanabai, Deputy CEO of Media Development Investments Fund. Please welcome Mr. Mohammed Nanabai.
Great. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum. It's good to be back at Al Jazeera as an Al Jazeera alum. It's probably been about 5 or 6 years since I was with Al Jazeera. And, one of the things when I was here back in the mid to late 2000s, we used to have a lot of former BBC people at Al Jazeera. And I remember a conversation with Adrian Monk, who's one of the executives of the World Economic Forum. And I said, we've got all these former BBC people, and they keep on saying to us, when I was at the BBC, we did this and this and this. And he joked, because Al Jazeera was sort of on this upward trajectory at the time, and he said, don't worry, there'll be a day when you guys can say, when I was at Al Jazeera, we did this and this and this. And I think that's come to pass, and I find myself saying that and always chuckling at that. So what I wanted to talk about today is a bit about social media and how that's been changing the news industry. And what the impact's been on us as content creators and us as journalists, because I think there's been some fundamental shifts. And we're at a point now where everybody accepts that social and social technologies and the platforms and everything that's come along with mobile has fundamentally altered the way we deal with media and the way we understand our audiences, the way we interact with them. So I thought it's a good moment to take a step back and to look at this and really try to understand what the shift has meant for us, because the shift has happened so rapidly. It's really a matter of 20 years that everything's changed in our industry. So, I'm sure everybody recognizes this picture. This picture was taken in 1963 in Vietnam, in Saigon. And it's a Pulitzer Prize winning picture from Malcolm Brown, an AP photographer. And when this picture was taken, what had happened was Vietnamese monks, Buddhist monks were protesting at the time. And they had gone out and they'd gone to the foreign press in Saigon and said, tomorrow there'll be something taking place. Please come. And most foreign correspondents at the time didn't bother. Malcolm Brown and 1 or 2 others went through. And this monk, and you can see in the background, there were many other monks around him, sat himself down very calmly and set himself on fire. And this picture was then taken, Malcolm Brown, was on the AP, through the wires, distributed around the world, showed up in newspapers, in the press, on television around the world, and really became iconic. And what we saw here was something that's sort of fundamental to the way press coverage happens, right? Somebody creates a spectacle, and this spectacle is then covered by us, the content creators, the editors, the news people, and then we disseminate it to the audience. And we look at the time this took from the photograph being taken, it being distributed on the AP wire, being sent around the world, getting printed, put into newspapers. There was a time gap that happened, but also it was clear, there was somebody who was the news media who produced, and it was then distributed, and audiences consumed, and that had an effect. Now if you fast forward to 2011, and this is Cairo, and these are the iconic scenes of Tahrir Square. And this was really 18 days of protests that happened. So we went from this idea of the spectacle that occurred, that the press would cover, to end up here, where it was a spectacular, that was 24-hour rolling coverage. Coverage that wasn't just us as the news broadcasting out, but it was really co-created, right? It was on social media, there were the protesters, the audience, were all participants in this. The viewers at home were watching this live, seeing it unfold on Twitter, on Facebook, through live streams, were all part of this. And it was ongoing, it was 24/7. And this fundamentally alters, and if you look at the story of moving from a photograph that gets taken and distributed over days, to something that then broadcast simultaneously around the world, being followed, being experienced by people everywhere. It's mind-blowing to think that in the amount of time, just years that we've got to this. But what's really interesting about this and how we got here was not that we were doing this coverage 24/7, but it was how it started. So, and it really goes back to this video on YouTube. This was one of the first videos that went online on the 25th of January in Egypt of that year. And you can see it ended up getting 3 million views. this is not today where you get 100 million views before you eat your cornflakes in the morning, right? This was still 2011. 3 million views was a huge number of video views. But this coverage came out before everybody else, before the news media descended on Cairo to start this coverage. So it was initiated by a person who was sitting up in their flat, in their apartment, who took this video. People saw it first. The media then reacted and then covered this, and a cycle occurred, where as the media descended, protests increased. As protests increased, more people in the crowd took videos. Those that went online, the media then broadcast this. And this cycle continued for those 18 days. And it's really important to look at, there wasn't somebody who went to the press and said, please, we're having this, something's happening tomorrow that's really important to Cyclone, come and cover it. When this occurred, somebody covered it themselves from the audience, who was a bystander, and kicked off a series of events. So, I want to unpack the shift that's happened over time. So, this was where we hear, what I like to call back in the old days, when Liverpool still reigned supreme in English football. Late 80s, early 90s. And this was how we dealt with our audience. We were the news media, we created, we produced, and our audience consumed. And that relationship was clear. It was easy for us to understand. But also, it had an effect on the business model, it had an effect on our distribution, it affected everything that we did, right? So if you think about it, our newspaper audiences were subscribers. We knew who they were, we sent them a newspaper. Our people who watched our broadcast subscribed, knew our channels, they knew what number we were. We were channel 37 on the remote control, or channel 5. And they'd tune in at 7 p.m. and watch us. It was easy, it was great for us. And then the internet came along, and things got a bit hazy, right? And the road became a bit more windy. And in the late 90s, as we all started going online, suddenly, people had this choice, right? They could go and look at a news website from anywhere in the world, but we still maintained this connection, right? Because when we went online in the 90s, we kind of still went to the newspaper that we knew. We just went to their website. We still knew them. Remember bookmarks? Right? You had a bookmark bar, and you drop down and you click on the website you wanted to go and see. And usually it was your hometown newspaper or your local TV station. So things got a bit more complicated, but we still had an audience. They still knew us. They would come and find us. We advertised our website somehow. We print them out, and people would come and they'd find us. In the 2000s, something radical started to happen, because this is when publishing technologies became democratized, and people were able to publish themselves with a click of a button. So these are the early days of Blogger and other social platforms, right? So people would be able to come online, they'd be able to publish something quickly. And that started fundamentally altering the publishing landscape, because no longer just us, there were other people publishing. Now we were sort of not necessarily competing, but there were other voices being there. And what we then started thinking about as an industry was, well, it's not us talking to them anymore. That was, those days are gone. Things are changing now. People are beginning to publish. They're starting to put videos onto YouTube. Social technologies were taking off. So we thought we'll sit in the middle of all of this. We hear what those bloggers say. We incorporate some of that into our stories. There was hope, right? Because we thought, well, actually now, in the past we didn't know what our audience was thinking. Now we could hear them. We could go online, we could see what our audience was writing, what stories they were reacting to. We could incorporate that into the cycle, and things were still good for us. But fast forward, to this decade, and everything became much more messy. And the reason is, as Yasser mentioned, business models for many of those social media companies, came to rely on advertising revenue. That advertising, they gobbled up the ad market, they grew it, and they became intermediaries in the truest sense. So while in the 2000s, we still had this open ecosystem. You had distributed blogging systems that existed. Some people would be on Blogger, some people would be on Vox, some people would be on TypePad, some people had their own WordPress blogs, and stuff was all over the place. But in this last decade, everything's converged into a handful of companies: Facebook, Twitter, Google, Snapchat, right? And those are the big platforms. And we see others, like in Asia, there's Line and QQ and Tencent, but by and large, there's really a handful of companies that are now controlling distribution. No one's going to bookmark bar anymore. No one clicks and says, okay, I'm going back to this website because I've saved it in my bookmark anymore. And it's put us in the position where we were suddenly central to a conversation, to where we're back on the side and we're trying to find a way to reach our audience. So we're looking at how do we do social distribution strategies, right? Because our audience is here, but they're not connected to us anymore. We don't have that direct relationship that we had in the past. And that's really one of the huge shifts that happened. But in addition, what's also happened is the same people who would make the news, who we go to cover, now has direct access to our former audiences themselves. Right? So Trump can tweet directly without worrying about going to the New York Times. Right? He has direct access to his audience. And that's been a massive shift as well. So in a way now we've become completely reactive. Right? We're covering what he's saying to our audience back again, instead of us being the ones conveying the information. And one of the things that we've come to accept is it's never going back. Right? This is the world we live in now, and it's only going to get more complicated and more interconnected and more dynamic. So this is the journey. This is where we ended up. So what does it mean for us? So I think there's a couple of things which I think are worth talking about. And first understand it, but almost philosophically, so then we look at how do we design strategies to deal with them as media companies move forward. So first of all, this disintermediation happened. Right? We used to have a direct link, it's gone. So how do we deal with that? And I think that's important for us to figure that out. But meanwhile, something super interesting happened as well. While we were disintermediated from our audiences, at the same time, we were able to engage them, which is something we couldn't do as well. And it's almost paradoxical that this occurred. Right? The link was cut, but it actually grew stronger in a way. So if you were able to figure out how do you engage with people across these platforms, even though they put themselves in between, you could still do really interesting things, and you could hear interesting voices. So I think that's the first effect. Second was the instantaneity of it. So things were happening now, happened at such speed that we were unable to comprehend. In a way, the broadcast industry is sort of best suited to deal with this, because the broadcast industry has always been working at speed. Right? So if you're a broadcaster, and especially a 24/7 broadcaster, news is always rolling in and you're always looking at that latest coverage. For people in the print media and other forms of media, this really hit them. Because suddenly you've been running a newsroom that's on a daily publishing schedule or a weekly publishing schedule, and suddenly you're expected to do not just daily news, but not just hourly news, but always on minute-by-minute coverage on Twitter, right? Which you're not geared up for. It was never part of your DNA. So, that really put people on the back foot. And everybody scrambled to get these teams to figure out. And there were different types of reporters, right? If you were a long-form reporter, a beat reporter, now suddenly you're expected to tweet and to do all these sorts of things really quickly. But at the same time, that created opportunities, right? For people who were nimble, people who could adapt to these platforms, people who could adapt to that speed, and who could figure out how do we do the long form, the in-depth stories, and make them work on these platforms. They were presented with opportunities to suddenly grow audiences. So while in the past, we were big brands, we had an audience, people knew us, we could see new players emerge now. Because suddenly, through the speed, through the scale, they could quickly reach audiences as well. And we didn't have that monopoly on them. The third effect of this was, something that we were already hopeful for in the 2000s, right? This was the time of the open internet. Everybody had a voice. You could go online and you could publish, right? And so it was a time when there were, many ideas. It was really almost momentous for us. And what happened, so while we've had that, and we've had all these voices come online that previously might have been marginalized, might not have had access, suddenly could go and they could publish. But at the same time, we've also seen the rise of censorship, right? Both by governments, but as well, if you go back to that image, by those corporations, right? Because they now, stand in the way, and they have the power to take something offline, to block something, and so on. So not only are we dealing with government censorship, but often we're dealing with platform censorship, and we're trying to figure out what that means. And And especially when we have these consolidated systems, it becomes a real issue and something we still need to solve for. And the first issue is really this idea of scale. Right? We could reach scale, and you can very quickly reach scale. Right? You could reach thousands, millions of people very quickly. Things were distributed, things could go viral. But at the same time, while we saw the scale happen, and we thought, well, now we can reach people who wouldn't otherwise have been interested in our perspective, we started seeing, and especially in the last 2 years, the issue of trust come up. Right? Where on the one hand, we could reach lots of people, on the other hand, there's so much misinformation on the network, and people trying to exploit both the scale, but as well as the fact that those same intermediaries now could allow anybody to publish, and on these platforms, people were unable to differentiate between what's true, what's not, what's misinformation, what's propaganda. So scale was great, but it also brought us trust issues. And that's one of the most burning issues that we face as the industry, both on the media side as well on the technology, internet platform side. And finally, this issue of open and closed networks. And I think this is quite fundamental for us because, previously we really thought when things were open, it was better for everybody because it meant we could root around censorship, we could root around all these sort of things. And when things close up, it becomes difficult. But it also means on the business model side that there's a few companies who now have control. They have control of the ad inventory, they have control of distribution, and they can throttle you and really just close down any organization if you fall apart. In the same way, governments might have had that power in the past. Now we see corporations pick up that power. Now we're not sure yet whether it will be misused, but those risks exist. So finally, I think it would be a mistake to really see all of these issues as technology issues, because they're not technology issues. Technology has caused it, right? The rise of the internet, the rise of this globally distributed system has brought these challenges to us. But these are business problems, they're editorial problems, they're product problems, and they're culture problems. And as much as they're problems, they're opportunities for us. They're opportunities for us to explore, to grow our audiences, to reach new people, and to innovate, and to build really interesting products that can suit our audience.
From our first broadcast, we have seen many changes. Innovation has driven us to limits we never thought were possible. As we constantly evolve, we strive to meet the challenge. The Future of Media Leaders Summit, proudly hosted by Al Jazeera.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, and distinguished guests. Now I'd like to welcome our next speaker, moderator rather, for the first session of today. It's about the social media impact on media, content, and audience. Please welcome our colleague, Adrian Finnegan.
You recognise that voice, by the way. It sounded very familiar. Actually, it wasn't me, although I was on one of the promos that's been running here today. That was actually my brother. It's a family business. Ladies and gentlemen, good to be with you this morning. Good to see so many of you here already. Good to have you with us. Diva Khatib, another colleague of ours from AJ Plus, the phenomenal success that is. Mohammed Nalabai, we saw him just a few moments ago, the Deputy CEO of the Media Development and Investment Fund, and Kinder Ibrahim from Twitter. Please join me. Before you sit down, sorry. Couldn't do a social media panel without. Come on. Because, as you know, the thing about social media is that not only are you watching this summit, this presentation in this room today, not only are we on TV via Al Jazeera Mubashir, but of course, the world is watching on social media, many of you using that hashtag, AJ Tech Summit. So down here, got to get the audience in as well. So you've got to come and take a, come on. You're all looking very embarrassed. Come behind me. All right. Yeah, okay. Smile, please, audience. I can't see you. Where are you? There you go. Please, come in. I've got a lot to get through in half an hour. Here we go. Smile, and There you go. Thank you. Right. Down to business. Kenda, I want to start with you. Dr. Bishop here was saying that social media platforms are not our friend. As you're from Twitter, how do you respond to that?
So, from a Twitter perspective, we think about relationships with media partners we actually think we are friends, and basically, particularly we have the function and a vision called media partnerships, which is basically mandated to help media partners with reaching new audiences, make revenue, and basically help them with innovation on the platform. So the relationship is very much a relationship of complementarity rather than a relationship of being basically a competitor.
Do you want to respond to that?
Adrian, you are a journalist. This is half the truth. I said they are not our friends and they're not our enemies.
Right. Okay.
Right. So they are both, I think, and that is because on the one end they give us access to single platforms that have a large audience, but on the other hand, as I mentioned, we have to keep feeding the beast, and the business models, our business model versus the Twitter business model, or the man in the middle that didn't exist before, in terms of ad revenue and communication with the audience, hasn't been there before, and now they are. So their business model is based on fragmented audience, 500 million and 600 million, and a billion. And for us, for publishers, that scale, so to generate revenue, not to cover the cost, or to really reach the audience.
So how do you go about marrying your business interests with the broadcaster's business interests, our business interests?
So first of all, it's our business model is based on, and in today's age, how users are consuming content. Attention is shifting, especially during news hours, to basically social media platforms like Twitter. We provide the scale. It's because users right now are discovering, and not only discovering, but consuming content on these platforms. So that's the scale. We obviously need this content, need the content to make, to provide something engaging for the audience. But at the same time, it's that platform is becoming very, very competitive because users have a lot more choices and, not a lot of time to consume this content. So it becomes, our working relationship with the partners to help them with standing out, to help their content standing out, and that is basically based on tools and products that we provide, based on bespoke solutions for them to monetize their content at scale and monetize their content in a safe and risk-free environment, and also help them with tools that enables them to do immersive storytelling that is basically the consumer is looking for. Tools like video, tools like live video, video 360, telling stories. It's not only the content, the type of content that is changed in terms of what users and consumers are looking for, but also the formats. And we are here to help media partners with these formats.
Yes.
Look, I don't want to spoil the relationship with such a but because they are important to us, but I think it's fair to talk about the flip side of it. And this is really where the key is. Just imagine a hypothetical where all publishers in the world unionized and decided one day to strike and not publish anything on the social media platform. What's going to happen? Traffic will go down tremendously. Probably the stock market for these platforms will collapse. So there is an implication. So what I'm saying is, what is the appropriate business model between the publishers who actually carry the brunt of the cost of producing original content, to publish it on social media platforms? That, on the other hand, who on the other hand take the, Facebook just last quarter announced, their average revenue per user is about $20. I guarantee you, with Asia Plus success, massive success, that Dima can talk about more, is much less than $1.
Okay, I want to talk to Dina and bring Mohammed in just a moment, but do you want to respond to that before we do?
Yeah, sure, certainly, specifically when it comes to monetization. Actually, so for monetization, we have solutions. I speak on Twitter's behalf. So on Twitter, we have solutions like Twitter Amplify, for example, which allows publishers to monetize, not only monetize, But it also allows them to reach new audiences. The way a program like Amplify works is basically a sponsor will pay media spend, and all of this budget will go towards promoting the content of the partner. So in case of, like, for example, AJ Plus content, not only would they be able to rev share with Twitter on the monetization, but also it allows them to reach an audience paid for by the sponsor that were not had access to before. So basically helps on both ends. And that basically that does not only rely on the partner's reach, but offers incremental reach for the partner. And that's our solution to help partners exceed and succeed in a very, very competitive environment. I just want to respond to the fact that, I mean, yes, I do agree that I think traffic will go down in the case of where, if media publishers had a strike about, on social media. But I want to point out two data points that I think are very, very important. The day of the presidential elections in the US, there were 75 million global tweets about the elections. These mostly did not come from publishers. People go to Twitter to find out who's talking what and saying what about these kind of events. We just wrapped up the French elections. There were between March 17th and May 7th, there was 54.8 million tweets about the presidential elections. This comes from candidates, this comes from news organizations, this comes from basically people who are interested and have opinions to talk about this important element, which is the presidential election.
How do those of us, I mean, Mohammed Dini, you might want to take this, but how do those of us who are interested, as you say, with 75 million tweets, how do we sift through all of that information and find what is relevant to us and interesting to us?
As a publisher, we have tools that enables publishers to swift through, as you say, these millions of tweets. Because actually, these platforms like Twitter not only have become a way for publishers to reach new audiences, but actually to discover content and create stories from these tweets. So a tool like TweetDeck, for example, enables publishers to filter by what they consider important sources to create content, a certain geolocation, certain rules. It can be very sophisticated and very dynamic and kind of sifting through content that is relevant for you and creating stories out of that.
Okay, Dina, let's talk about the phenomenal success that is AJ Plus. I mean, I'm so proud to work for this network. It's so forward-thinking and dynamic. AJ Plus came along at the perfect time. It was the perfect product at the right time, wasn't it? Tell me, how has it become so big and so successful, and why?
Well, we managed to use everything that Kinder talked about, which is this opportunity for journalists to be in direct touch with the audience, to make the stories part of the audience's life and to make the stories that matter to the audience and to get to know the audience. I love the example you mentioned about the tweets, 75 million tweets. You're asking how could you filter that? Or how could we, before social media, go all over the world, everywhere, and find out what people are thinking about an election? It was not possible. The opportunity of social media gave us that possibility as journalists. And AJ Plus came up with a format that was unprecedented at the right time, using social media, talking to people and listening to people with the values and the ethics of the journalism of Al Jazeera Media Network. And I think that is what made the success of AJ Plus, that we were not citizen journalists just spreading news that could be rumors. We were practicing journalism, but with new formats, using the high-tech technology of social media.
You talk about building this relationship with the audience, which you've done, as I said, phenomenally successfully. But for most users, there is another platform in the way. You've got Twitter, you've got Facebook, you've got other social media platforms between you and the audience.
I don't see it as between us and the audience. I mean, let's take television. Television had to go through Hotbird or whatever satellite or cable network, cable company to reach the audiences. We never saw that as between. I don't see it as between. It's actually our medium of finding, reaching new audiences that we could not have reached otherwise. And audiences that are not necessarily present in other platforms, as in like television or radio or press. So, and they're very engaging audiences, they're very interactive audiences. So I don't see it as between, I see it as a space that we use as publishers to find the audiences that we want to find and to get to know them, to learn from them and to work with them.
But I mean, are there problems in terms of censorship when you go through a platform? This is something that you were talking about earlier. The fact that platforms will sometimes arbitrarily, it would seem, censor, even when the material has been published by professional, responsible journalists. Is that a problem?
Yeah, I mean, yes, there are rules for each platform, and you have to get to know the rules, and you will play by the rules sometimes, and sometimes you play around the rules. I mean, that's part of our daily learning of how to use those platforms the best way we can. But there are things also you can use to your advantage, as in, for example, look out for thieves who keep copying your stuff or publishing your videos without any license. And platforms give us that opportunity. With Facebook, for example, we managed to find anyone who takes any of our videos and uploads it on their page or their account. We do the same thing with YouTube. Well, it's Twitter as well. Kinda knows she sometimes spends nights with us chasing people who are stealing our videos without any copyrights. So you just have to know the rules and play, as I said, play by them and play around them sometimes.
Okay, Mohammed, you've been very quiet. What do you make of what you've heard so far?
So I think, these issues change depending on your size. So if you're AJ Plus with a huge audience, you can access your account manager at Twitter or Facebook and get them to change something or do something. If you're a small publisher in Burma, you've got no hope in hell of finding anybody at these organizations. So I think, there's also a certain asymmetry. So, what the experience of a big organization is working with platforms versus the experience of small organizations is quite different. And I think it's always important to bear in mind whose voice could get drowned out. What are the stories we don't hear about censorship on platforms and so on? Now, we're still grappling with this issue of who gets censored, how censorship can occur. And we have to bear in mind also it's not just the platforms, right? It's also the jurisdictions they work in. So sometimes they're following local law. Sometimes those laws are more draconian than what the publisher might want itself. Right? So, whether it's something like the laws in the UK, whether it's Turkey blocking Wikipedia completely. Right? So, these things are complicated, and there's a lot, while we think about it globally, often as global news organizations, there's a lot of local nuance that we need to get around. And I think it's important never to forget those nuances in this conversation.
Kendra, do you want to respond to that? I mean, it's okay if you're a big publisher, you get a lot of help from Twitter, not so good if you're a small up and coming.
So actually, my response to that is that without these platforms, there's no way for a small publisher to get discovered at all. Because this is where the audience is. You got to go where the audience is, and you got to utilize the tools that are available to you. Big or small organizations, we partner with a lot of small organizations that have niche, unique content, and we want to help them grow. So that's my take on that. On censorship, I just have to add that I know there were a couple of examples from Twitter's perspective. We want to be a place where people can express themselves openly and freely, and unless the content is abusive to somebody who has basically submitted a request about the content that is abusive, or content that is basically working with law enforcement on issues like terrorism, publishers' content do not get removed unless it basically has copyright infringement. So that's Twitter perspective on content censorship.
Okay, Dima, do you want to come back on that?
On censorship, you mean? A while back, Facebook censored a few Palestinian pages accusing them of terrorism. Well, we used Facebook, the same place, to spread the story, and that put pressure on Facebook. I mean, it's not as clear cut as in like you censor and it's finished. There's always room for you to play around in that same space that's being censored. But we don't really suffer much. In AJ Plus, I would not say that we've suffered much from this kind of censorship for our material because we know the rules.
Yes, you touched upon it in your presentation about censorship at a governmental level. One thinks of China, for instance, and how difficult it is to get any kind of message into China. I mean, how do publishers content producers deal with that kind of censorship?
So I think it's different on a case-by-case basis. I think in many countries that we work in, we see some very brave publishers, very brave editors who are working often under very difficult conditions. And in these markets, you've got, on the one hand, you've got sort of the media business models falling apart globally, right? So even if you're in New York or you're in London, there's pressure on ad revenue. So you've got that, and that's difficult enough to deal with as a publisher. And now you go into a country where there's also political pressure, and you're in the situation as a publisher where you're just eking out the living, right? But you kind of really need to be there and really believe in the journalism you're doing. You need to believe in your mission in order to make it work. I think there's an opportunity for big media organizations to be able to help some of the local and national organizations in terms of amplifying the work that they do. At Al Jazeera, we've had huge campaigns for some of our former colleagues who've been arrested in Egypt and so on. But there's many journalists in many countries who are still arrested. And I think it's the role of some of the big players to be able to get behind it and say, well, where's journalism under threat? And can we help those local journalists who don't have national platforms or international platforms to advocate on their behalf?
You also touched in your presentation on the issue of trust. With so much information, we talked about the wealth of information that's there that end users have to filter through. How do organizations, how do publishers, content producers go about building trust and reputation? I mean, AJ Plus has done it. How does an organization that's relatively small do that?
Well, I think trust is both the same way we build trust for time immemorial as publishers, right? It's being able to publish stories that are accurate, that are timely, that are sourced well. So the craft of our journalism shouldn't change just because of the speed. And I think this was a huge problem. We all rushed into the speed and just wanting to be the first to break something and wanting to be the first to get a comment on it. Never being able to pull back and being able to verify, being able to fact check. We've seen the rise of fact checking, right, since the US election. But the question is, what's a journalist's job if not to fact check?
Yes.
We've got all these separate fact-checking organizations, which are important and they play an important part. But what else are you doing as a journalist if not fact-checking, right? So I think that's really important. One of the ways that we filter through these massive amounts of information, I work with an organization called Global Voices, and what it does is, it has a network of bloggers, writers, editors, translators throughout the world that on largely a volunteer basis will look at what's the main stories, whether those are in the press or social media in a particular country. And but being able to provide that local perspective on a story that's of national importance, and being able to find people and connect people. And I think that's really important, because what you then see is this deluge of millions of stories and all these tweets being filtered in a way that somebody who understands the local context and be able to package that for people in other parts of the world.
David, on this issue of trust and reputation, AJ Plus has, of course, the Al Jazeera brand behind it, the media network brand. Therefore, the trust is already high in the brand itself. But how do you deal with this issue of fake news, countering fake news?
First of all, it's not given. The trust is not given just because you come from Al Jazeera Media Network.
Really?
On the contrary, you're coming from a mainstream media organization,
okay.
And the users of social media are on social media because they run away from mainstream media and they want an alternative voice. So you actually have to build that trust. And people don't follow brands on social media. They follow the story that they like. So today they like your story on AJ Plus, tomorrow they like it on Fusion, after tomorrow they like it on NBC, etc. They will follow the story. So you have to work on that trust every single day. They don't follow brands unless you really build it really big. And then they have this blind trust with you. And I believe AJ Plus has achieved some of that, but we are still every day being looked at as, okay, we trust or we don't trust based on the story. We could be hammered for some very small little thing that people doubt today and then applauded tomorrow for something that we do. So you're always being tested by your audience, and you have to keep building that trust. And the second thing is that I think audiences have changed completely because they are now active active, they can come and completely destroy your story, even when they don't have any basis for it, because they do a campaign and they don't like your story, and you have to work much harder to show that what they're doing is not right and that you were right from the beginning. That takes hard work. We didn't do that, for example, in broadcasts. We didn't have to do that. People watched the story and then you went back home, they went to bed, and it's finished. You don't, they cannot. Every day you have to keep thinking of how to reach those new audiences and build that new trust with those new audiences.
Yes, I know that you've got a few thoughts on this issue of fake news and how it impacts organizations in a business sense.
Yeah, just a quick note on the trust in Al Jazeera brand regarding Asia Plus. We did research a while back, and we found that about 60% of the Asia Plus English audience didn't know that it was part of Al Jazeera.
Really?
Yes, that's really significant, and it is in line with what Nima just mentioned. I think also trust in the digital and social media is really a relative term. I mean, if trust was so important, fake news wouldn't have spread so much. Right? And it is because people just take the news and go with it. I think people who are well informed, they know that this, they dig in and find the source. And so the issue of trust to me is really kind of relevant. A lot of people, go to InfoWars, and they trust InfoWars. And so there are so many, dimensions and elements that play into the trust issue. From the digital point of view, as I mentioned in my talk before, it is, I can trust someone, but I'm not really kind of a loyal person to that person. Loyal to that person in terms of coming back to him, asking for advice all the time. So we have to go up our game from just looking at trust only and engagement only into building loyalty, so they can come, proactively come and look for it, not being subjected to the algorithms of social media.
Yeah, but are they going to come directly to your platform, or are they going to come to you through a platform? As you said,
I think it's both. That's why I'm saying our friend, right? Yeah. We should continue to push for and invest in having and growing our audience on social media platforms. But for us to build that level of loyalty and give them that unique experience, user experience that we're talking about, from also an editorial point of view, I don't think it makes sense, that Dima is sitting in the newsroom and deciding what to put on Facebook, and then the algorithm decides, whether that video will appear on my target audience or not.
But in terms of monetizing content, it's better, obviously, for the audience to come directly to you as a content producer rather than via the platform, isn't it?
For sure, but I think our driver in Al Jazeera, this is great that we are here. Number one is reach and accessing and informing our audience.
Yeah.
Number two is revenue.
Right.
So we're not entirely, really primarily driven by revenue. Because if we were driven by revenue, we would have continued to, do TV, as we heard the talk from Deloitte yesterday, that advertising revenue in TV is solid. We just forget digital and bring them cats and dogs on TV and have people, and bring brands to advertise on our.
So actually, I'd like to comment on the subject of fake news. I'd like to call it trustworthy versus not trustworthy news. So I think with social media and platforms, it just made discovery of information a lot easier, which unfortunately meant, like untrustworthy information. Also, the discovery of that information has become easier. But also, on the same token, with a platform like Twitter, which is open and public and conversational, it's very easy for users to basically search for multiple sources that are talking about a story, and to see if there are contradicting information. It also makes it easier for media organizations to fact check, because that media organizations are quite responsible basically fact checking and providing credible information for users, as well as a layer of basically algorithmic to basically give lower priority to, from a platform perspective, to give lower priority for information that is not trustworthy, or accounts that are provide not trustworthy information. So that's on the fake news subject. On the monetization subject, I think it's very important to understand monetization. The way it works is that advertisers want to go where the eyeballs are. So be it on social platforms, be it on TV, be it on digital. I think the best strategy for publishers, for media organizations is to find the right balance of monetizing off platforms and on platforms. Off platform, I mean, also alternate media platforms, there are solutions that all the platforms provide. I spoke about Twitter, Amplify. On platforms, we also want to work with media organizations. We are currently developing solutions that allows them to, through embedding tweets and through embedding content from Twitter that is basically curated to their own needs, also monetize that content so that that serves increases the engagement on the site, increases the engagement on the digital assets because people are spending more time consuming that content, and also make incremental revenue using that.
We're almost out of time. I want to throw this out to the audience just a moment. I know Mohammed wants to come in.
Yeah.
Dina first, yeah.
About monetization, because you've asked many questions about it. For us at AJ Plus, I feel that what we make out of AJ Plus is much more than money. What the money that we could be making out of monetizing AJ Plus would not give us what we have without making that money. In the US market, we are leaders now in the news business, in the digital world. Sometimes we're actually classified higher than CNN and Fox News in the Tubular Labs classification every month on Facebook. That means we reach more audiences than the local US huge media organizations who have all this history. We have this access to the brain of young Americans to tell them the stories the way we want to tell them, whether it's about the US or about Palestine or about anywhere else. And that kind of thing, money cannot buy you. So I think for us at Al Jazeera Media Network, it's very important to think that not being revenue driven does not mean you're not achieving much more than money could ever achieve for you.
Mohammed?
So, I do want to take an issue with this description of, even using the term fake news, because I think we need to call it what it is. It's propaganda and disinformation. Often these stories and these sites are all either state-sponsored or they're highly partisan and political. It's not some sort of cuddly fake news story. Right? These are highly politicized, disingenuous, and it's just propaganda in this network age. In order to deal, Tim Moore says in his book, The Information Merchants, he says that propaganda to be effective needs to be complete. It needs to be everywhere on all platforms, reaching everybody in society. And what we've seen now with our distributed systems is it can be complete for a segment of the population. Right? And I think the most important thing that independent professional news organizations need to do is to ensure and to pull away the completeness, to be able to bump into those audiences and strip away some of that propaganda, some of that misinformation. It's not untrustworthy. This is propaganda, right? You have to counter it.
Final word from you.
Yeah, so really to just final word on this. So if you think of the target audience, not in terms of age group or where they are, but in terms of their level of expertise and knowledge about a certain political topic. On one end you have the very experts, and on the other end you have the novices who just want to know, just the beginnings of North Korea, for example. So at the expert level, those are people who know the trusted sources, who would sit and read a 5,000-word article and read in depth. But it is also our role as publishers to take those who are novices by the hand and give them, this bite-sized information to give them the knowledge and take them, along the expertise, continue really to have them understand the topic. So this is why we have to provide this diversified, content spectrum from the 1-minute video into the 5,000 article.
Our time is almost up. I mean, that went frighteningly quickly. I want to get some views from the audience if we can, some questions. If you'd like to ask a question to any of our panelists, please show your hand. We'll get a microphone to you. Then stand up, tell us who you are, then ask a question. Somebody must have a question after all of that. Yes, a gentleman here in the front row. Can we get a microphone to the gentleman here? Thank you, sir. Please.
Ibrahim Nassar from Al Jazeera Media Network. Thanks to the panel and information we got from them. My question is, building on what mentioned by Dr. Yasser, to build loyalty and maybe possibility for monetization. What this means, we need to invest more or work hard on our content to suit digital platforms, and how we can capitalize on our resources to do this. And a question to Dima, what success factors make AJ Plus booming in US? And do you think this can be adopted in other areas like MENA region?
I want to just repeat what Adina mentioned about the monetization. Let me just make this clear. We are driven to increase our reach and influence. And to increase reach and influence, of course, the audience will grow. That's number one. And as a side effect of that, it's nice to have revenue coming. But we're not, because if we are driven by revenue, we could be like a BuzzFeed, have listicles and things like that, and content of that sort, which we do not do and we will never do. So we are number one driven by, as I mentioned before, informing people. And yes, we have to invest in, as also I mentioned, social media platforms are like Twitter, as Kenda mentioned before in one of our private meetings, that it is, they are going into more, live shows and, produce content specifically for online, the Bloomberg deal and other deals. So we have to continue to invest in producing original, digital content. Absolutely.
Al Jazeera, that we practice in a way that very few organizations actually practice in a new sphere, and I think that made us gain the trust of people. Obviously, with the new format that we've introduced into the market, I believe that success, yes, can be and is being replicated. We have AJ Plus Arabi and Akhota Plus Español. That is actually already very successful in Mexico. It's grown very, 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 very quickly, and it's already a leader in the Latin American market. A lot of people are copying it. The same thing for AJ Plus Arabi. Everybody, literally everybody, is trying to copy AJ Plus Arabi at the moment. So yes, I do believe it's replicable, but it's not exactly the same product that you make in every region. You have to adapt to every region's audience, to their different cultural differences and cultural diversities, as in Latin America and Spain. Nor on YouTube, nor on Instagram, nor on Snapchat. You will find some of them here, some of them there. Some topics here and some topics there. So some topics you'll have to do in dialect, some topics in classical Arabic. You have to learn those nuances that do not exist, for example, in the US market. So you have different challenges and different successes.
Okay, we've got time for one more question.
Yes, Mubashir. It's related actually to the issue of legality and monetizing, but in a different way. Who owns the audience? Are we the media publishers, if we're AG Plus or Vox or Vice or whatever, are the one who owns the audience, or the audience is owned by the social media outlets like the Facebook and Twitter? For example, if the Facebook tomorrow decided to delete a video from the AG Plus Arabic or AG Plus English or from Vice News or from Vox News, because he doesn't believe, for example, also that Israel is occupying Palestine, what are we as a publisher can do related to this? It's our editorial message which is being affected by what Facebook wants to deliver to the audience.
That's a great question. Whose audience is it? Broadcasters, ours, or is it the platforms?
I think it's neither nor. The audience decides where and what content, what format do they want to consume, and it's a responsibility of publishers and platforms to work together to deliver the right message to the audience wherever they are in the format that they are. So the example, I can only speak of Twitter again in terms of basically news censorship and removing content, unless the content is abusive by our basically terms and conditions, and unless it infringes copyright, we do not remove content at all. So it's the premise of Twitter is to give everybody a voice to express themselves freely and.
So it's a very diplomatic answer. And as someone who's neither the publisher nor the platform here, I think it's clear. But it's no longer the publisher's audience in this current model. Right? Some publishers do have a direct relationship with their audience. They'll have subscribers and so on. I think we've gone through this process where people have given their audiences over to the platforms. It's not bad. Platforms are immensely important. It's how we all consume. So it's not a positive or negative relationship. It just is. But I think what lots of publishers are doing now is email lists in particular. So you see this rise of email lists, which is the way to directly connect again with your audience. You see a lot of paid content models, again, trying to bring subscribers directly onto sites. So I think it's clear. You know, I mean, are you delusional if you think you own them? You know, there's a sort of philosophical answer where the audience is owned by anybody. But I think the reality is when they pick up their phone, they're going to the platform. They're not going to.
I am philosophical, so I don't think audiences are owned by anybody. Audiences are audiences. I do believe that when you build loyalty, and it worked out really, really well for us. We even asked people to send us videos through their WhatsApp, so phone numbers, and they all provided us with phone numbers, and we connected with them directly to those videos that they sent. So your audiences, when they're loyal to you, they will go with you wherever you go. You don't own them, nor do the publishers. It's a matter, as I said, it's something that you build every day with them, and they build every day with you, wherever you are, wherever they may be.
Yes, let's get the final word.
Okay, so I have to start with Kim on this one.
Yeah.
I don't think anyone owns the audience and control. I think that the right question is who has more access to the audience? And if the question is access, it's definitely the platform, because they know about the behavior of every individual. That is really the actual power of the social media.
There we're going to have to leave it. We're out of time. I thoroughly enjoyed that. I hope you did too, ladies and gentlemen. Please show your appreciation for Thank you.
انا موافقين
بنحاول لكم KPIs اصعب وتمارسون التونيك
ياسين
كان اول بس تبع ديلويت كان اليوم لا
Haris, I wish you gave me the data from Gina about the
Hey?
لو تكرمت الحضور الكرام هلا يفضلكم بالجلوس الى مقاعدكم. Ladies and gentlemen, our guests, please back to your seats so we continue the session. And the speaker, the next speaker is our security advisor, and he will be talking about the security for the networks. شكرا دكتور. ياسين ياسين Dr. Yasser Bashir. الجزيرة مباشرة, are we ready to go? Giving them for a lunch. Hello again, thank you very much for staying with us. We will start now our next speaker. He will be talking about the defending broadcast networks and that hope is not a strategy. Please welcome the security advisor, Mr. Harun Mir. Please.
Good afternoon. Assalamu alaikum. So, I'm not on the screen yet. So, super quickly, we want to talk today about broadcast security. I'll go in a little bit on the angle that I'm hoping to take. But first, the clicker's not working. I want to introduce you to this gentleman, who's someone called Brian Snow, and he's the head of information assurance, or was, for the American NSA. And the reason why this is interesting is because a few years ago, Brian said this. He was talking at a conference in Malta, and he said that everyone needs to understand that your cyber systems function and work not because of the expertise of your technical or security staff, but solely due to the sufferance of your opponents. Okay, which basically means the only reason you haven't been attacked yet is because people haven't bothered attacking you. Okay, so it's a sobering thought, and it's one that I want us to start from. While we're talking about Brian, super quickly, I'll give you some background. I spent about 6 years building networks, building applications. Then I spent about a decade of my life just attacking stuff. So I worked in offensive cybersecurity, breaking into stuff, finding out how to break into stuff, and optimizing that. And since then, I've started working in defense again. And the logical question for you at this point is, so what? Why are you telling us this? The one reason is just so that you know that I'm not going to be as smooth a talker as Dr. Yasser or Mohammed earlier today. Okay, you should expect a little bit of roughness for my geekness. But more important than that, what you should understand is that I don't have a vested interest in making this sound worse than it is. Like, the only reason I'm speaking here today is to try to tell you, here's what it looks like for someone with an attacking point of view. Okay, in the past I've published on various things, but mainly the reason for what I do, why I do what I do, is to try to make sure that we're focusing on the right parts of the problem. And one of the surprising things that I'll tell you is that not everyone needs to care about security equally. Okay, one of the common things you get is everyone panics. Everyone thinks that security is the most important thing. But if you run a mom and pop shop, it probably doesn't matter. Like, you're terrified about your credit card getting stolen, that stuff's covered by the banks. Probably doesn't matter. So not everyone needs to worry about it. And an interesting thing, in South Africa, where I'm from, many years ago, they found out that whenever internet banking got hacked, everyone thought it was chaos for the bank. But internet banking users' numbers actually went up because people would report on internet banking in the news. And for the most part, people just remembered internet banking from the news. They didn't remember that it was internet banking that got hacked. And it turned out that any news was good news when you were in the banking business. And similarly, some people have recently started doing studies on whether stock prices are actually affected by breaches. So if you look up here, you'll see companies that were in the last few years breached: LinkedIn, Adobe, Target, Staples, Sony. And you'll see that stock price has no correlation whatsoever with whether or not there was public information about a breach. So it turns out that your stock price doesn't really matter. And for those of you who remember, a few years back, there was the fappening when Apple were hacked. People stole nude pictures of celebrities' phones. I'm not sure if you looked at Apple stock recently, hasn't exactly taken a hit. Snapchat, actually IPOing has been worse for them than the breach. But in general, again, to my point, not everyone needs to care. But what's interesting is, I think you guys need to care. And I'll talk a little bit about why this is, but for the most part, it's because I see you guys at the center of almost a perfect storm. Okay, there's 4 things that I'm going to talk on very briefly today on why I think security is going to matter so much for you guys. The first one, I'm not going to spend too much time on, but really simply, people who are living in broadcast, for a long time were living in an island. Okay, it didn't matter if your stuff was insecure, you weren't exposed to everything else. Okay, so for the most part, you had an unlocked house, but your house was in a really safe neighborhood. Okay, and recently with convergence with TCP/IP, what's happening is your house is moving into a much worse neighborhood. Okay, and people who trace internet security on the internet or security breaches on the internet will go back and show you the spike that happened when Windows started shipping with TCP/IP. Okay, the moment Windows got a working TCP client built in WinSock, that's when attacks started happening. And this stuff is going to start happening more and more to broadcast. As broadcast joins IP and file-based stuff, you're going to start getting hit more. But the bigger problem for you guys is one of increasing complexity. For those of you who know, generally, when you're trying to defend stuff, and this is mainly for the vendors in the audience, the number of lines of code you have is almost an indicator of how many vulnerabilities you'll have in your code. Okay, because as humans, we haven't figured out how to write secure code yet. When Linux was first released, it had 10,000 lines of code in the kernel. Okay, today, more than 10,000 lines are committed to the Linux kernel every day. If the whole operating system, Linux, had 10,000 lines of code, today, just your web browser has something like 17 million lines of code. Okay, the amount of complexity is off the charts. Nobody can audit all of that code. Humans certainly can't. And your computers are different too. In the early 90s, when we started hacking on stuff, we tried to hijack the processor on your computer. Today, your computer no longer has one processor. Some computers have 6. If you've got this MacBook and it's got this fancy LED strip, that's a computer all on its own. A few years back, a guy in Germany actually took a close look at modern hard drives. And he found that hard drives themselves are mini computers. You could literally run Linux on the hard drive because hard drives now have microprocessors on them. And it's not just hard drives, right? If any of you have plugged in using one of these VGA cables or video adapters, a few years back, guys from a crowd called Panic took a hacksaw to open one of these, and what they found was 2 gigs of RAM and a system on a chip. Okay, which literally means that this VGA adapter that you pay $100 for is actually a computer, like a full functioning computer. It's just one that's been programmed to move graphics around. Okay, if you're talking about complexity and stuff that you know how to defend, I'll posit to you that your security guys don't have evil VGA adapters in their threat model. Okay, and to make matters worse, it turns out that every modern monitor actually has a working x86 computer in it. And like problems get worse and worse, and you get to the point where you just want to throw your hands up. A few years ago at a conference, again in Germany, 2 guys called Bunny and Zobs started looking at SD cards. Okay, so these tiny $1 SD cards, it turns out are also tiny processors. Okay, so these tiny things are actually capable of computation. And because they're capable of computation, they can actually be hijacked and for all intents and purposes be made to be evil. So fully programmable, fully man-in-the-middleable, fully attackable. Now the reason I bring up all this complexity again is because if you're running your security team with 2 guys on a shoestring budget, you're not even in this league, okay? Like this is not even a remote consideration for you. And you're lucky if they're getting you to change your passwords. Which comes up with this, right? And everyone knows, no matter what division you run, people complain that there's a shortage of people. But actually, in security, this turns out to be a pathological problem. Okay, so guys from Leviathan ran a survey over multiple years trying to look at security and the scarcity problem. And they ended up with a bunch of interesting conclusions, but one of them that stands out is that if every employee from GM, Costco, Home Depot, Delta, Procter & Gamble all became security experts overnight, there still wouldn't be enough security people to fill the need. Okay, so right now, just getting security people in the world is like finding hen's teeth. And to this, you've got one problem worse than that. And that's the only thing worse than not having security people is having bad security people. Because when you have bad security people, you think you're doing something about the problem. But most of the time, what you're doing is just busy work. Okay, you have guys showing some activity, they're moving stuff around, but actually you're just getting more work as a result of it. As a tip, if you find you've got to do ridiculous security things, like if you're changing your password every 2 weeks and it needs special characters and hieroglyphics, chances are your guys are focusing on the wrong things. There's better things for them to do. I had a lot in here to pick on our vendors in the crowd, but I lightened it. Something that's slightly interesting here. Before doing this talk, I went through to some of the broadcast systems and I pulled binaries off them and started looking at them to see if they were doing the best of breed security practices that happen in the world today. So if you guys remember a few years ago, Microsoft were getting kicked all over the place. Like every second month there was a big worm, made headlines, computers crashing all over the world. But at some point, that stopped. How did that stop? Why do you not get Microsoft worms anymore? Part of the reason is because Microsoft invested ridiculously heavily in application security. They invested ridiculously heavily in compiler optimization and protection to make sure that code wouldn't be as vulnerable anymore. Without taking names, I took a look at a whole bunch of software from vendors in the last week, and it turns out that only one of the 8 pieces of software that I looked at are opting into those modern security standards, which means, by and large, when it comes to broadcast security or the security of that code, we're in about 2001, 2002. The only reason we're not seeing worms in broadcast yet is because broadcasters been living in this isolated environment. As soon as that gets more exposure, it's going to get hit, and it's going to get hit ridiculously hard. If you're a vendor, you should be saying, but I know we've got a security team, and I know we do some of that security audit stuff. But I want you to ponder this. This is from 2016, the Chrome security team. So Chrome in 2016 had something like 32 people working full-time just on security, just on the Chrome web browser. Okay, because that's what it takes. Okay, if you're taking 2 or 3 people and you perform a pen test once or twice a year on your code, you're fooling yourself. Because with all of this effort thrown at it, Chrome still manages to find bugs. Okay, Chrome's still getting hacked periodically. The only reason you're not is because you're not facing that level of scrutiny yet. And of course, the question that comes up here is, well, maybe there's no motivated attackers. Okay, this is what keeps lots of people safe. The fact that nobody wants to take me out is the reason I'm not getting taken out. But if you're in the broadcast industry, I'll say that this clearly isn't true. This tweet was from last night. All of these French sites were down after a DDoS attack. Most of you will know about the attack that took TV5 off the air. Okay, relatively simple attack that worked. And increasingly, you'll see from all different parts of the world increased aggression against broadcasters and the news media. You see it come out of the States, and it's not really a new thing, right? Like everyone in Jazeera, I'm sure knows the story about the time when George Bush spoke about bombing Al Jazeera for its ongoing coverage of the Iraq stuff. Now, something to ponder is, it's clear that you've got these massively funded guys who are interested in being able to flick a switch and switch you off at some point. And with all of that, I'm going to say it's going to get slightly worse. And the reason for that is this screenshot. Does anyone recognize what this is from? This is the Iranian president touring the nuclear facilities at Natanz. And the reason I've got it here is because a few years ago, almost everyone would have heard about Stuxnet. Okay, so Stuxnet turned out to be this computer virus/worm written by a combination of USA and Israel that effectively set the Iranian nuclear program back 3 years. Now it's super cool and there's lots of James Bond details, and if you're a geek, there's lots to be interested in. But I'm not talking about that. What should be your takeaway is that a superpower in the world wanted to get a result. They wanted to slow down Iran's nuclear enrichment, and they did it by using a cyber attack. Okay? And since then, it's become more common. Recently, talk of North Korean missile failures are also being attributed to cyber attacks. And if there's a part of you that says, well, it's okay because it's only these massive, super progressive governments that can figure it out, what you should know is that the Snowden leaks basically told the whole world, this is what you should be doing because this is what the other guys are doing. Now, whether you judge Snowden as a hero or as a traitor doesn't matter. What's important is that in a world post-Snowden, even really small countries and governments have figured out that there's massive leverage that they can get by investing in cyber attacks. It's why Russia and ISIS were able to attack and take down TV5-1. Because instead of hundreds and hundreds of thousands on a missile, like George Bush wanted to use, you can now pull it off fairly modestly with good hackers. And at this point, you should be saying, well, how do you expect us to compete with that? Like, it's one thing if you're asking us to fight garden variety hackers, but now you're asking us to fight against state-sponsored attacks, and that's just not fair. And the ray of hope is that it actually can be done relatively easily with just two important things. The one is a mindset shift. Okay, and this is something that's really hard for people to come to terms with. But you need to understand that your companies, your organizations, your software will be breached. It's not possible, it's completely impossible that you will not be breached. The NSA, who everyone thinks is 10 feet tall, didn't know that Snowden was hacking them until he was on a plane on his way to Hong Kong. Okay, you will be breached. The question is, how quickly do you react to it? And how do you contain it once that breach happens? And the second thing, and probably the most important thing, normally with security they say there's no silver bullet, but I'm telling you here, if there's one thing you take away from this talk, this is the one thing you should be taking away. Whenever people talk about going to RSA is this big security conference where people try to sell you stuff. This lady is the head of Chrome Security, and she made this tweet a little while back saying, listen, if you're planning on going and spending money at RSA, don't. Save your money, spend it on good people, and then actually listen to them. And that turns out to be surprisingly hard. And even if you think you're not that type of organization, I'm telling you, you are. Because, like, there's a very simple metric. If I showed you a blinky shiny box, and there are many on the market that sell for $1 million, that capture your attacks and let you know when it's happening. Most of you go, $1 million, we can probably do that. If I told you, here's a guy, he's probably the best guy you should get for this job, just pay him $1 million a year, almost everyone flinches. Because we're totally okay to take that for a silver box with lights on it, but totally not okay for paying that for a human who actually knows what he's doing. And that's got to shift. Because whenever people talk about security, they draw this triad and they'll tell you it's about people, process, and technology. And I'm telling you that's actually wrong. All it is about people. Because if you have the right people, they will put in the process and the technology to do what you need. And if you have the wrong people, all the process and technology in the world is not going to save you. What you need to do is find a way to find the right people and then find a way to keep them. So in conclusion, super quickly, for you guys, you need to consider the threat is super real. The broadcast industry has been protected almost by accident because you guys were hidden on an island and you're not anymore. Breaches will happen. The important question is how you deal with them. And the only way you're going to dig your way out of this hole is if you can find good people, find a way to listen to them, find a way to take care of them. I think that's all I've got for today. If you guys have any questions, I think we've got time for questions. Other than that, you can hit me on Twitter and tell me why I'm stupid. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Harun. Thank you. Now, ladies and gentlemen, with our next session for today. After that, we'll be breaking for lunch. So please allow me to welcome Mr. Sami Zidan. He will be managing this session about cybersecurity in media and broadcast. Please, Sami.
Thank you very much indeed. Could I start, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for attending this session, which I hope is going to be a very fruitful, exciting and lively discussion panel. Let me invite up to the stage here the members of my panel. Could I ask Harun Mir, he hasn't gone too far, please take a seat. Harun, as you know, is from Thinkson, which is a cybersecurity company based in South Africa. Could I also invite up Khalid Al-Hashimi? Khalid is the Assistant Under-Secretary for Cybersecurity at the Qatari Ministry of Transport and Communication. Iya Yagnashwala, could I ask you to come up, sir? He's the CTO of the Times Group of India. And Nuruddin Awlabi, who's the Technology Manager of Al Jazeera Media Network. So let me just say a few words to introduce the session before we get into actually having our roundtable discussion. And what we're really talking about is bringing IT technology into the broadcasting domain and how it's generating new opportunities, and I'm sure we all know and live that experience every day for media production and media distribution. But it's also exposing broadcast companies to new security threats. Now, it's true the internet has improved our ability as journalists to gather news, to access information, but it's also making our jobs, it's making our movements, sometimes our sources and their privacy also vulnerable to being hacked or leaked. Now, media companies are increasingly being targeted in massive security attacks, is what we are hearing. I'm sure our panel will enlighten us with plenty of examples about that, which we'll discuss in a moment. But I guess the question is, what sort of approach should we adopt in facing this challenge? And I'm going to start off with a basic question for all of our panelists, which is, we in the media industry, our job is basically the dissemination of information. How do we balance that against or with the responsibility for cybersecurity, which is about how to keep that information to ourselves? Who wants to have a stab at that?
I'll take a step. So I think to start off with, you need to realize that that's a false dichotomy. Like, security doesn't mean keeping stuff to yourself, it just means publishing it on your terms. If you take the simplest, most obvious case, you guys want to have sources, you want to keep your sources protected, and you want to publish parts of the story. It's a combination of both that allows you to exist as an organization. On the one hand, giving your sources the security, the comfort of knowing that actually they can talk to you and be protected, but still getting the story out to the people.
But there may be times where you're not ready to release all your details of your story yet. You're still cooking it, it's still in the pot, right? Especially for those who work in investigative media, investigative journalism, and You don't want it coming out the oven until it's ready. And in those moments, is there not a dichotomy there which is not a false one?
At any point in time, you do have data that you can disclose, and that's what the audience ultimately sees. But there's always parts of the data, including sources or including the pre-cooking phase for an investigative case, where you do not want to release that information before it's actually due to be or partially released, right? Not even fully released.
All right.
Generally, I have seen from my experience, right, that broadcasters generally have found a balance between being able to put out the information they need when they have to, yet be decently secure. But like Harun said earlier, that you are as secure as the ability of the person who is attacking, or the fact that you've got an attack or somebody is not trying to attack you. But I think the way broadcast systems have evolved, their exposure to the world, their being more open, happened more than a decade ago. Like,
So do you feel you found that balance?
I think many broadcasters have found the balance. That's not to say that that we have the balance. We will never be breached. We might be breached, but I think the balance exists the way in the way the networks are designed, in the way the workflows are designed. I think there's a very decent balance. Things can go wrong. I think there's a huge room for improvement. Right? Certainly, I think ignorance about security events plays a great role in our being, for lack of a better word, complacent or being happy in the situation we are in. So, as someone said, ignorance is bliss. It is not in this case. But I think there is a very decent balance right now established between how to keep information inside and how to put it outside.
Would you share that, Khalid, from a perspective of a Ministry of Communication?
Yeah, I think security is about trust and protection. So if you apply the appropriate measures to protect your assets, information is your asset, then there is a balance. And I believe there is a balance. I've seen, most of the measures we apply in our systems and networks according to business needs. So for us, security is enabler rather than restriction.
Maybe on that point, can I get you gentlemen to talk about what are the top 3 cybersecurity challenges that information disseminators are facing today? When you make your list and you go to work, what are the top 3 challenges?
One of the things you mentioned yourself is to ensure that what needs to go out should only go out when it is supposed to, right? Which will go out, say, when they are halfway, when they are incorrect. That of course always a concern, especially with topics like investigations. Right? And the other one, of course, is to keep the network coming all the time, right? Keep your ops going. The TV one coming down and they probably make warfare. I don't know what happens. Third one is that
we should talk about hacking, basically.
Exactly.
So how to protect yourself against hacking?
So from my perspective, from a television broadcaster's network, I think somebody messed up really bad. Or as Harun
how? Give us some examples. You don't have to mention names particularly if you don't want to, but share some examples of how broadcasters
there's been cases where people have got into the networks by pure social engineering. Right? A friend of mine recently told me about a company where pen drives were dropped in the parking lot which had malware, which was the employees used in the company. Right? And that was then used to spread a virus from inside. So their perimeter was maybe good enough, right? Security of the perimeter, but from inside they were all open going out. Right? And things spread from there. So the other thing for me is we need to educate the users. Harun mentioned about how important it is to have good security people. It's also very important to have educated users. Right. The recent Google Docs attack, I'm sure everybody must have heard of it. It was so obvious that you should not have clicked on any link or done anything with an email. It wasn't even addressed to people. All the recipients were in BCC. Right? The mail was sent to a really bad, really easily recognizable idiotic email address. why would you go and click on something like that? So that's something we need to educate our users as well.
Okay, let me take that
all
one
in the hands of
to
security people.
Do you have time to re-educate the entire newsroom? And do the journalists feel they have time to be re-educated about cybersecurity when many journalists feel like they're working under pressure just to get the story out?
I think so, absolutely. So I've been privileged to provide some of the trainings myself. And we found that generally newsrooms and journalists appreciate the learning that they get out of the security trainings because they perceive it's really part of their role once they realize the risks that the tips they learn can help them protect from.
And the damage that their ignorance can cause to themselves and their organization. I think people are more than receptive.
How is the cloud impacting? I've got to raise the cloud now. That seems to be the new buzz thing in newsrooms, in any sort of media dissemination operation. How is that impacting cybersecurity? Khalid, can I ask you to have a stab at that one?
Cloud, excuse me, cloud and any of the technologies are the new trends, and we try to, again, assess the risk with those new technologies. Most nations, including Qatar, we establish and create policies and standards to facilitate the usage of cloud. So, in a nutshell, what we say is basically before you consider cloud service, you have to classify your assets. Based on the classification scheme of your assets, you can choose the appropriate provider. So, we have published several advisories, as well as also the cloud security policy, which facilitates the usage of cloud without, if it's indoor or outside.
Doesn't that make you more vulnerable because now you're storing your information remotely?
What they do is, we have these kind of engagements with cloud service providers. If they're in the region or international, we apply, or they apply, or they kind of comply with the same terms and conditions. Depends basically on the data they transport to them. So it doesn't, cloud is very mature now, and we have lots of service providers locally and regionally and internationally. And they are flexible to comply with our terms as a nation, as an organization. And 60-70% basically, organizations in the region use of cloud services. Most of them basically in the region because telecom service providers are providing cloud-based services. And some of them are using also, the Amazons, the Microsofts, the Googles. So there is no restriction from us to use the cloud. What we say is basically consider the data and taking it to the cloud.
Okay. Haroon, the cloud has matured enough. Do you agree with that now?
Yes.
Nothing more for us to worry about?
So I think what you're getting from almost everyone on the panel is a very definite maybe. And the reason for that is it's dangerous to make blanket statements. So if I told you the cloud is safe right now, Bob's, my file drive online probably isn't. What you want is to find a provider, like Khalid says, who you've got some terms of service, some sort of agreement with. But almost everything starts with an understanding of your personal risk model. For your organization, understanding what your threat model is. It might be perfectly fine for me to use Dropbox at home, because actually people are not trying to cut off my access in a crisis. But when the Jazeera gets to use Dropbox, then it becomes an organizational decision. It becomes if you needed this file and we wanted to report on some new Trump-Bannon conversation, can this be pulled off the air? And again, I'm not saying the answer is yes or no. I'm saying the answer is, to go back to my talk, you need to have good people who are assessing that risk and making that call. And to give this answer and touch on something you asked earlier, you've got the wrong security people if they say no to everything. If the default answer to everything is no, you can't, then you don't need those people. You can replace them with a cutout that says no, you can't, and invite that to every meeting. What you want is people who say...
It'll be a very quick meeting.
Exactly.
It'll be a very quick meeting.
You can do with more of those. No, so what you want is people who intelligently understand the risks intelligently understand what your organization needs, so they don't tie a tourniquet around your neck to stop the poison flowing and then kill you by strangulation.
Reading between the lines, Harry, it sounds like you're saying there's no way out of the cloud right now. Is that where we're going on this now?
Yeah, right now everyone's on the cloud, whether they know it or not.
Why is it so important? Why do we need the cloud?
Many operations for business benefit greatly from the cloud. Many of them don't need it. All vendors are trying to take everything to the cloud as beyond our support. That happens in slice of it. That may or may not be the case, that may take a little while to. You very rightly pointed out, right? They have policies which define what can be put where based on the classification of the criticality or the importance of the data. That's what almost everyone does, implicitly or explicitly.
All right, Khalid, you want to make a brief comment?
It's cost effective. There is very
cost effective storage.
There's very less, capex and even opex. Instead of investing in your own data centers, buying your own machines and buying your own operating systems and applications is cost effective. Most of the startups, from Silicon Valley, they're using cloud. Most of them. Startups, you use your services online. For example, if you're using BNB, that's on the cloud. You're using, the others, they're all on the cloud. Sorry to use BNB, I'm not promoting BNB over here, just giving an example. So all the services which you are using, they're on the cloud, and they're secure. The reason they're secure is because you're trusting them with your credit cards.
All right, and even though Harun's solution, hope is not the best answer, the expectation, hope is that decently good provider of cloud services is in a better place to set up better security practices.
Then you can do
and
locally.
Individually, all of us can do.
Right. It sounds almost like, we were talking a little bit about this before the panel session, it sounds to me like the front lines of journalism have moved now, where we generally as journalists think that the front line is neither reporter or the journalist who's making the story. But it sounds like there's another front line at the back now, which is cybersecurity. Nuruddin, give us an idea of how much of a battle is going on the cybersecurity front line that we may not be aware of?
So when we discuss security, we look at it in layers. So there is a front line that does exist. It's not the only line of battle. So you rightly said we get network attacks constantly.
How frequently are we looking at?
So at a high level, I think it's not just Al Jazeera, but in general, a lot of media organizations get almost daily attacks. When you think about examples multiple every day.
That's scary, isn't it?
Of course it is. Think about the example of the non-targeted attacks, right? Targeted attacks are more scary, but non-targeted attacks are viruses floating around the internet with so many different threat actors behind them, with so many different motivations, including financial motivations. Any of these, when they hit your network and you're not ready and prepared, they could cause.
Who's responsible? Who's targeting the media right now in terms of cybersecurity?
Who's your adversary? Who's your adversary in media? Who's your competitor? Who's trying to, let's say, stop you from expressing your opinion? That's your adversary. Usually
are we talking like state actors or individuals or hacker groups or
anyone who disagrees with what you say or you want to say?
Yeah, I think right now you're seeing all of them at play. You're seeing state actors at play, you're seeing hacking groups. And one of the things that make cyber interesting is that right now it's hard to distinguish between. Like you can get an attack that takes place, like the Sony Pictures attack. And in the end, the final analysis says that it was a state-sponsored attack by North Korea. And I can tell you that attack is technically no more sophisticated than I've seen teenagers pulling over an IRC prank. And it's one of the things that make it a crazy time, that you can't, that you can suffer an attack, suffer material loss, and your potential attackers are either a nation state paying mercenaries or teenage kids who went out for pizza and then decided to hack you. So yeah, it's an interesting time.
I just want to remind the audience, now we have in a couple of minutes, we will start to take questions. So if you want to start getting your questions ready, in a couple of minutes I'll turn to the audience. The ushers, I hope, are ready with the microphones to start taking questions from you. So generally, gentlemen, is the situation getting better or worse? Are we becoming more vulnerable or less vulnerable?
I don't think it's a really classified like that. I think at some level, everybody's trying to catch up with increasing abilities of the hacking. Right? So we are playing catch up. So, but people are generally, I think, managing is my sense. But there are lots and lots of threats that we have no idea how to deal with.
I think it's a tricky question. So the question of are we getting better or worse? When you look at attackers versus defenders, attackers are getting better. Defenders are getting better because they're learning over time.
So it's a constant game.
It is, but the game doesn't start out equally because attackers always initially had an advantage. Attackers need one way in, defenders need to close all the doors. And that's why security experts say attackers think in graphs, because any direction, any traverser of the graph that takes you to your target point is a fair game. Defenders think in lists, harden this server, harden this network, and so on. So the battle is to start off unequal, right? They're both getting better, and then the context is the increased complexity, like Harun discussed. Software is getting more complex. Millions of lines of codes. I think you mentioned the Linux, Microsoft is over 50 million lines of codes. The more you have, the more bugs you have, awaiting attackers to discover them and exploit them. So if you look at the total equation, I think we're just depending more on technologies that can be vulnerable. It's getting scary. Within the information security community, we get accused a lot of being pessimistic, and I'm sure you guys get that a lot. As much as we try to not be to look like the pessimistic person, but to relay the actual facts that over-dependence on technology comes with its risks, we need to rethink, unless...
Well, this might be a good point to see if we have any questions from the audience. If anybody has a question, please raise your hand. We'll try and get a microphone to you. Anyone has a question? And I would ask you to start with your name and professional affiliation. No? Okay. Can we get a microphone here up at the front, Dr. Mustafa?
Just to keep the debate going,
please.
Otherwise, there's not plenty to ask the question. But how much are we working with people to educate them on how to protect their network, their computers, etc.? Because what I heard up till now focus so much on the expertise of people. If we find somebody for $1 million but can protect us, we should take him even though. So how much are we working with people? Sometimes that's probably the only way or the best way to protect us from the attackers. Thank you.
Okay, please go ahead.
That's a very interesting question. I think what's happening is because software is becoming accessible to both parties. The hackers are the good guys to exploit, hackers will exploit to do bad things, good guys will exploit basically to detect. Education is missing. Education for all. I think our education systems are really behind, to prepare the future cyber operators. Cyber hygiene is basically coming from education. So I completely agree with you that we are basically neglecting this very significant factor, which is education. Most of our education curriculum is not focusing on ICT as an essential curriculum. We're giving them as, side courses in schools. And I'll give Al Jazeera credit because 2013, there was an excellent campaign inside Al Jazeera. It was led by Al Jazeera IT. I think Mr. Kamal Santamaria, the broadcaster, I think your colleague, he made a video, and that video was really, spread across Al Jazeera staff. Since then, we have seen this improvement in Al Jazeera. And we use that video, to also in other, organizations. The relation with media and education, I think, is very important, to address your question.
Nuruddin, it looked like you wanted to comment on that one.
I honestly didn't.
No? All right, my bad. Does anyone else have a question? Okay, can we get a microphone, please, to Wade in the second row?
Thank you. How this question is for you. So you mentioned the two things that you can do. The second one was like, how do you react, respond, and contain the situation? So with obviously running the risk of, if you put out a model of somebody who's, like the best in terms of best practice regards to managing the security and response to it, the next day they're going to get hacked and, they'll become a spectacle. Are there any examples that you can give who have reacted well?
So I think there's not much point in like if I say company A, but
just an example of like what reactions you've seen as a
of
model.
really good reactions. What you see surprisingly moving from is companies like Google, companies like lots of the hot tech companies right now who've had a major incident have then figured out that they needed to move to this new model. So if you take Google as an example, for a long part, they sailed along almost the same way most companies do, kind of oblivious to this. Like they had a security team, they had people, and then they had this famous incident called the Google Aurora attack, where it turned out funded by the Chinese government, attackers had broken in, and were then using Google infrastructure to look for dissidents inside of Google, look for Gmail and stuff like that. And since then, Google's completely flipped around. They completely super reactive to attacks that happen. So even now, you will get attacks against Google, but what you'll find is their teams reacting within minutes and hours instead of days and weeks. A stupid statistic there, and hopefully this doesn't apply to most people here. Most companies only figure out that they've been breached after an attack has been on their network for over 200 days. So people break into, and this is a stat.
200 days?
Yeah, something like 230, 260.
Why does it take us that long to figure out we've been attacked?
Because for the most part, your networks are not just needles and haystacks, they're haystacks of needles. So it's all this noise all the time. And in truth, attackers on your network don't look like attackers, they look like other users. And so in the past, we thought we'd have systems that could tell us, here's an attacker. But when Snowden was accessing shares on all of those files, on all of those servers, to the NSA systems, he just looked like sysadmin number 2 who was accessing all those shares. So it's hard to spot. The stat is still stupid, it's inexcusable that people can be broken into for hundreds of days and not know. And what you want to do is drag that window down. If you can drag that window down, then hopefully you find out about your breach through your security guys and not when the story is running on the
How can you drag that window down? Does anyone have any practical experience with that?
Yeah, I think one of the most effective techniques is to create what Harun is actually an expert in and can probably talk more about, but what we call honeypots. Fake servers, fake networks, fake everything that are designed not to be touched.
You're trying to attract?
They are attracting attackers, and they're designed not to be touched by your local staff. And your signal there is if anyone touches or trips these honeypots, you can get an alert and investigate further. I think that's one of the most effective defense.
One of the techniques also is threat modeling. Threat modeling is basically
threat modeling.
Threat modeling. So you start thinking like you're adversaries. People are going to attack you, and you look at your system, from a different perspective. Now, this will help you to realize the weaknesses of your system, and you can patch them, grade them, apply the appropriate controls instantly. This is another one, and complements also honeypots.
Okay, where are we now? I think we've got a couple of minutes. Oh, and we have a question. Go ahead.
Thank you. So I just taken it back to associate it with the industry a little bit. Most of the professionals in media are trying to protect something, not the security side of it. They're trying to help them protect that, but mostly they're trying to protect their sources. They're trying to protect their stories. They're trying to protect their movies, their content, piracy, things like that. So what's available? What's out there for them? What kind of guidelines can they follow without obviously putting themselves and the organization that they serve and their colleagues at risk?
Okay. Nuruddin, have a go at that one. I'm always dragging you into the front line.
So I'm not aware of full-fledged solutions. Technologically, when you talk about encryption, there are ways to implement technical signatures into copyrighted material, if I understand the question correctly, to authenticate the material. In other words, to validate that this material is authentic to that source and it cannot be reproduced or copied or infringed on. And of course, this has been an application for a lot of copyrighted materials. Besides that, I'm not aware of a full end-to-end solution at all.
So the truth is, there's a shocking shortage of useful software that serves this part of the market. And in part, it's because the industry is being dominated by certain software players for a long time, who've been selling generic solutions that don't actually apply to everyone. So every year, everyone, including Jazeera, spends hundreds of thousands to millions of dollars on solutions that actually won't do any of the stuff that you're talking about. And it's because what you're talking about starts, again, with people smartly identifying the need, saying, listen, this is what we actually need to do. And the danger that I mentioned earlier with that is, you can have a security team of 40 people, and they'll run around resetting passwords, doing sticks on servers, and never ever address what you just spoke about. And a mark that your security team is doing the right stuff is that they can then either put together custom solutions like this for you, or put together pieces of public solutions to make up solutions like this for you. But it's why right now people are so important, because you can't buy your way out of this problem because the market's not ready to serve you yet. It's why my focus is on people. You need people who can then assemble those pieces to give you what you need.
Okay, I know it's lunchtime, but very briefly, because you manage newsrooms, tell me how you deal with that challenge very briefly before we break up.
Well, as I said, when we started, our broadcast networks typically have a decent degree of separation between what is open, what is closed, what has to be protected. And then like we said, we are developing or continuously refining our what is called data classification policy to identify which intermediate securities are important, right, and where to apply what level of security measures. Right? It might be very simple, like if there is a critical report that is important, and let us at least have say full disk encryption enabled on his laptop, right? So if he has to access his files, he needs to put into a password at least. There are very basic things that you can do to address certain pieces of the organization. So you have to look at each and every piece of data as an object and not try and apply a generic solution to everything.